I got a strong A star in A-level psychology, AQA, in 2025, and here is my best advice so you can do the same. So as psychology is quite a content heavy subject, it is so important to keep on top of the workload and complete your revision materials as you go along. So my college taught it topic by topic, and after every topic, or as I was going through the topic, and some of them are bigger than others, I do think, I was making my revision materials. Personally, for me, flashcards is what worked for me. So how I actually designed my flashcards, let's say, on Quizlet, is I had 2 flashcard sets for each topic. So let's take social influence, for example. So in them, I had one set of flashcards that was called the social influence main flashcards. Not very an inventive name, but basically that included every single bullet point on the spec for social influence was covered in that flashcard set. They would be quite long, like probably like 80 odds flashcards. But again, I did it to quite a lot of detail and I broke it down in different flashcards. And I basically included the AO1. You need enough AO1 for each theory that you would be able to write a 16 marker in it. Then I would also have evaluations. Now this is a bit of a controversial one because some people think you shouldn't revise evaluations, but I personally think you should, because it's quite hard to think of them on the spot, let's be real, in the stress of an exam. So I didn't used to put them in detail, I just used to put strength, like research support of so and so, weakness, like socially sensitive or deterministic, or I would like put a bit of evidence in a lab and then put a link, but a very short term, like, because in your revision, practice writing the evaluations up in full, but on your revision materials you're going to have loads of theories, loads of evaluation points. You don't want to write them all up in full because you're not going to fit them on. That's going to be an insane amount of information overload. So just literally, I learned about, I think you can get away with 3, but I would do 4 on the safe side. So I did strength, strength, weakness, weakness. Obviously some of them 3 strengths, 1 weakness, or vice versa, but aim for 2 strengths and 2 weaknesses. So that was what was in my main flashcards. AO1, the theory, AO3, the evaluations. Then I had the research in another separate set. So I had social influence main flashcards and social influence researchers, and I did this for every topic. And in the researchers one, I would have the main pieces of research or the research support or contradictory research, and I would summarize what they did. I would obviously include the researchers, like sometimes it would be like research support of Moscovici and the main flashcards in the evaluation. But then in the flashcard set of the researchers, I would say Moscovici, and then underneath I would have what Moscovici did and found. And that just meant that it separated them, and you can do more quick fire with the researchers because you're going to know a lot of researchers, and I think separating them out was really helpful. I only did this like partway through the year, so it was a bit annoying having to catch up, but I found in second year when I was revising it was really difficult just having one flashcard set. I suppose you could even split it into 3. You could have like AO1 evaluation and then have the researchers. That might be a nice way to do it, but I didn't think of that at the time. But yeah, so I think having different flashcard sets is really important, but I did have that for every single topic. So as you can imagine, making the revision materials is a lot of work, but I genuinely believe you, mostly, not in all cases, but you get out what you put in. I think if you invest that time and effort into making revision materials, learning your revision materials, it's going to pay off. So how I was using my flashcards is that I would learn and memorize them, and then I would active recall them, and I would blurt them, and then to consolidate it, once you know the content, I would do exam practice questions. I do them timed. I give myself 30 minutes for a little section, or if a whole paper, obviously 2 hours, obviously 38 minutes, 2.5 hours if you have extra time. And I think this is so important because you need to know the content. Don't try and do practice questions without knowing the content, because there's just no point, really, personally, in my opinion. Know the content, but make sure you give yourself enough time to do practice questions, because there's certain things that you can only learn by doing practice questions, like the command words. what the skills that they need you to do in the exam, like application, AO2 questions, they're not going to be covered in your revision materials. You need to know how to like think on the spot, and I think by doing loads of revision, like by doing loads of exam questions, that really helps with it. Helps with your timing. It helps you realise, can I actually write everything that I need to write in that specific amount of time? So obviously you're doing those exam questions, you're doing practice papers. It is so important. I don't think many people know this, but it's so important to actually mark it, see what you get, and to compare with the examiner's report. Get the examiner's report up. Some papers you may not be able to find one, but most of them you can find an examiner's report. And what that does is it basically tells you how students have done in that specific year, and it can be really helpful and sometimes reassuring. Like if you really didn't get a question, like it's a genuinely really hard question, you can go, okay, hardly anyone got that this year, or this is what the mistake that everyone that year made, so you know not to do the same thing. And I think it can be really helpful because sometimes they say what specifically students should have done or should not have done, and I think reading it can just give you a little bit of insight. You don't have to do it for every paper that you do, but I just think it's worth doing that. I also think reading as many model answers as you can is so important for psychology, because structure is a lot. I remember being marked down because my paragraphs were like different lengths. I don't know if that's just I don't know if that was just my college and just how my college wanted us to write, but there's a bit in the mark scheme, I'm pretty sure, where it says clear and coherent. You need to know how to write properly and don't just waffle. So yeah, read as many model answers as you can, and you can find this on the AQA website. You can just have a look at like the teaching resources and stuff like that, and you can find quite a lot of useful information on there. And the other thing is know the spec. That may sound a bit weird, but just know the spec, because know what comes under every topic. Don't just know social influence, like just social influence. Know what the bullet points are in social influence. You don't have to know them word for word, but like just know, be familiar with it. What I did that was really helpful is I found on the spec what the key phrases were, and then I put them directly onto my flashcard. So like I say, what is this, and I took it from the spec, you know. And I think obviously then I learnt it in more detail, but I think that was really helpful, because then they use the phrases of the spec often in exam questions, so you can go clearly, oh, that's referring to that part of my flashcard, and that really helps me, because it just separates the information out. And obviously make sure you have every bullet point in the spec covered, because they could ask you a question on anything in that spec. Okay, another really important tip is remember to use sophisticated and fancy vocab and terminology, because there are a lot of people that take psychology. I think in 2025 it was the second most popular A-level. The examiners are going to read a lot of answers. You want to make yours stand out, and I know it sounds a bit weird, but I think just upgrading your vocabulary, I think just makes you stand out more. Like I just looked up synonyms for words, like for example, instead of with socially sensitive and offensive as an evaluation, I also chucked in the word antagonistic. You know, just put in words that are just show that you know your stuff. You're not just like regurgitating from a textbook. And stuff like if it's outdated and it has low temporal validity, then say it's obsolete. You know, just say these words that are just a bit different, that make your answers stand out a bit more. And know some fancy phrases, know terminology. Don't just know SSRIs, know selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So know stuff like that, because it just shows that you've gone that a bit more, and it's going to help you pick up marks. And especially like the hormones and neurotransmitters like serotonin, know that it's like 5-HTT. Know stuff like that because you stand out. Another piece of advice that I think really helps me get an A-star is knowing how to write evaluative points effectively. I use the structure of PEAL, so point, a sentence, evidence, 1 to 2 sentences, elaboration, 1 to 2 sentences, and then link, another sentence, and I'd make sure there was about 5 sentences between that altogether. You want them to be quite meaty. I think personally, for me, I used to do 3 detailed evaluations for a 16 marker instead of 4 rushed, wish-washy, non-detailed. Personally, that's what worked for me, and clearly it paid off. I stuck to that. If it was AO 3 equals 10, I would write 3 detailed appeals, but I was putting really detailed examples, really specific examples, you know, evaluative terminology, fancy terminology, like psychology specific, you know, vocab. And for obviously if it's an 8 marker, if AO3 was 3 marks, 1. I just did 1 meaty evaluation. And also find evaluations that you can repeat, make your life easier. For example, one of them for me, research support. Research support is such a good one. I know you can't repeat the research, but research support is a really good one to know. It shows the examiner that you've not just learnt the theory, you've learnt supporting evidence with it. They're going to be more impressed with that because they appreciate that it takes time to learn researchers' names. Try your best to put the researchers' names in it. And the other thing is knowing ones that you can repeat for so many. So I knew psychology as a science, that being a strength because it promotes credibility towards it and you can get funding from this. And then what a nice little evaluation from that would be then bleed the essay in, make it flow and go from this funding, practical application. That was really helpful for like the psychopathology stuff and schizophrenia and the paper-free option topics that were a lot of treatment stuff. That is really good evaluation for that. So I think make your essays flow if you can. I think that really helps you go higher up. Don't just go a strength, a weakness, a strength. Try and bleed them in. If you want me to do a video more in depth on how to revise, I'm happy to do that. So let me know down below if you want me to do more revision methods advice in detail. I might do a video for research methods more in detail, but my biggest piece of advice for research methods, as I know a lot of people find it challenging, and it definitely was my least favourite, I think know your theories, but it is inevitable. It makes up a big part of your psychology mark. So I think research methods is so important. It comes up in every single paper. You need to know your research methods. I think know the theories, do flashcards of the terms like volunteer sampling, all the different types of sampling, know them off by heart, and then apply it to the questions. But I think practice questions is how I got there with research methods, and I did make a bit of a comeback with research methods. It is possible, I think, for research methods because it's more skills, but it's not that content heavy. Like, yes, there's content to know 100%, like you can't do the questions without knowing the content, but I think it is quite a good one to perfect as you go along because it gets easier. You recognize the questions. They often, like the essays, they don't really repeat. They may repeat the structure of them, they don't repeat like the actual questions really. Whereas for research method, you notice them pop up, like they're slightly different. It may be the exact same question but just apply it to a specific STEM. So I think know how they tend to answer them, because as I did more and more, I recognised the questions and I was like, oh, I've done one like this is how I did it. So use the mark scheme especially for research methods because it tells you exactly what they wanted you to say. Like some of the applications, I would have never thought of them, to be honest with you. It shows you how much you need to think on your feet for research methods and applying it to a random study or a random scenario that they give you. So I think being able to have that skill is so important. And I really focused on that from about March in year 13, which I would not suggest doing because I left it a little bit late. But, well, to be honest, it was more April, but it is possible. But I think don't leave everything to last minute with psychology because it is so content heavy. Make sure you're revising consistently I think little and often is much better than big chunks, but don't like do like 4 hours of psychology without having a break. It's not going to be useful, you know. Little and often revision makes it consistent. It's going to help space repetition. It's going to help it be ingrained into your long-term memory, and then when you recall it closer to the exams, it's going to be a lot easier. The other thing with psychology that is quite an advantage is because it is such a popular A-level, there is so many resources online. Use that to your advantage. There's so many podcasts, so many videos, so many textbooks, so many websites. There is literally everything you can think of, so use that to your advantage. Know what type of learner you are. I quite like to listen to a podcast or a video on it as I was walking to college or something, so you don't have to always be sat at a desk doing something. You can do stuff. If you've got an hour-long bus ride on the way to college, pop in a podcast and listen to it. Maybe don't do it every day because you might get a bit bored, but you know, just switch up your revision so it doesn't get as boring, because revision can be boring. It really can get very tiring and very same like, so I don't even think that's a word, but you know what I mean. Like, I think switch up how you revise, because it helps you stay motivated. So I hope this video has given you some guidance and help on how to get an A star in psychology. If you genuinely work at it, it is possible. If you would like to see any other video ideas, any other psychology specific advice or tips, please let me know down below and I will be more than happy to do a video about it. Thank you for staying and watching this video. Please do like and subscribe, and I will see you next time.